Hello, it's Hassan here again. I hope you're well. This is my second video addressing the Qatar World Cup. The first video, you may remember, I recorded, I think it was 2 days before the start of the World Cup in Qatar. And I addressed some of the criticisms leveled against Qatar and invited people to think, consider, ponder and be challenged and maybe shift their perspective. This is a follow-up to that. And you can see I have Gary Lineker in the background. Because a bulk of my responses will be addressed to him, to his criticisms he made during his monologue, and that shot there is actually from the monologue during the opening ceremony. So I think spent about a minute criticising various aspects of Qatar. So I will talk about those, and then secondly, I'll address the criticisms made by some of the Muslims, some really serious criticisms against Qatar by these groups or some of these Muslim brothers, and which I totally disagree with. And some of those examples they gave really daft, bordering on conspiracy theory, absolutely daft. Okay, but I will address them as well. Thirdly, it will be a challenge for all of us, whether we're Muslims, non-Muslims, Arabs, non-Arabs, to shift our thinking, shift our perspective. It is very important to discuss, understand each other, definitely challenge each other. And that's what diversity and inclusion is about. It's not just promoting one specific culture. It is celebrating various cultures, diverse opinions as well. And the opinion I'm going to share, obviously, is diverse on one end, in the sense that it is probably a minority opinion, compared to the media outlets that had criticised Qatar. So it'll be an interesting perspective. Yeah, so the challenge really is not just for the critics of the Qatari Arab Muslim culture, I don't know, but also I think it's a challenge for us as Muslims to shift our perspective as well when engaging with other communities. So I will be referring to our Jewish brothers in Israel, our Hindu brothers in India. Why would I be doing that? Well, a lot of things, politics, religion, culture, social issues have all been mashed up in the culture here. So whilst my criticism is addressed primarily to the critics of the Arab Muslim Qatari culture, I think it's a chance for self-reflection as well, that we need to be self-critical as well in how we view things. So I will come on to that. So it's a shift in perspective. That's the third point. The fourth point and the final point is that I'm going to leave a key message after summarizing everything here, a key message that you're going to take away from this video. Okay. Now, so let me start off with Gary Lineker. Actually, before I start off with that, when the media reports, commentators, broadcasters started criticizing Qatar, literally a few weeks before the game started, what that reminded me of was 2010. So let me take you back to 2010, when, was it 2011? I think it was 2010, when India hosted the Commonwealth Games for the first time. And the reason why I immediately thought of India was because just before the Commonwealth Games started, there was a huge level of criticism by Western broadcasters against the Indian organisers and the facilities, or lack of, apparently, in the athletes' village and so on and so forth. They're very, very poor quality accommodations, and there was so much negativity there, and I could not understand why. But it turned out that India had held a very, very successful Commonwealth Games, something to be proud of. And it was really interesting because the critics could not even think that a country like India were they thinking that it was, it's a third world country, developed country? This is a Hindu majority country. They just ride on elephants. So are they going to know about this building a quality infrastructure and quality games? Obviously, they were not aware that India sent satellite to Mars, right, at a fraction of the cost of NASA. And they don't have the know-how or the technology to build facilities for the Commonwealth Games. It's really, really interesting, really daft. So that's what got me thinking. But the games in 2010 were very, very successful. It was something to be proud of as part of the Commonwealth. So I'm originally from Bangladesh, and you had Pakistan, you had I think 50 other nations that were part of the Commonwealth, and they enjoyed themselves. It was a huge success. So is this playing out here as well in terms of Qatar? So you have, I don't know what stereotypes one could have. So you had Hindus and Muslims riding elephants in India. In this case, you probably have Bedouin Arabs riding on camels. Was that the stereotype? I don't know. But it looks like it is becoming a very successful World Cup when you look at the feedback from the fans that are actually out there. So coming back to address our friend Gary Lineker. So freedom of speech was one of the things that was raised. Now, generally, the freedom of speech might be restricted. It may not be as free as we have it here in the West, where we can criticise our politicians. Boy, in the UK, are the politicians getting lambasted by the media, by people. So that sort of political freedom isn't there as such. But in Qatar, there had been other debates, certainly, where controversial issues were aired and debated. So some of you may know of Tim Sebastian, who's a veteran BBC broadcaster. Gary Lineker certainly will know Tim Sebastian, they'll be colleagues. And he used to chair the Doha debates, right, which I think started in the early 2000s, so going back 2 decades. Controversial issues were discussed, debated. People of diverse opinions actually debated some of these issues, and they were aired all around the world. So that freedom to discuss, debate was actually there. Okay, so when you say freedom of speech is curtailed, what do you actually mean by that? Secondly, the workers' rights. So it is a right thing to raise, definitely legitimate. Now, when Gianni Infantino addressed this particular issue in his press conference, he said that Europeans really don't have a right to criticize this aspect because they've oppressed people for 3,000 years and should be apologizing for another 3,000 years before raising these issues. Now, I don't quite agree with that because, yes, there is an element of whatabouteries, and I think a whataboutery, what it does is it detracts attention away from some sort of serious issues that are going on. So I think critics were right to raise the issue of workers' rights and 3,000 or 6,000 people who had died as a result. So that definitely should be raised rather than Europe trying to apologize to the rest of the world for 3,000 years. But again, to put things in perspective, there were literally tens of thousands of workers that were employed. I think, was it over $200 billion US dollars were spent on the infrastructure and everything. But it wasn't just to kick a ball around, it was all the structure, the support that went up with it, which also meant tens of thousands of workers coming from Bangladesh, my country of origin, Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, Africa, okay, so that they could benefit from the investment in the World Cup. They and their families as well, and they have a right to benefit there. So when critics said that, those billions of dollars should have been spent on feeding the poor, well, providing employment is the best way to feed the poor. And there was a quote, wasn't there, who quoted this really famous quote that feed a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish and you feed him for life. Employment, business opportunities, that's the way to end poverty. So with the Indian example again, in the last 2 to 3 decades, they've really accelerated in the economic development, investment in education, in technology, trade. Poverty is declining rapidly, right? And there's a rising middle class. It is becoming a superpower. And that is the answer to poverty. Prosperity is the answer to poverty. So in the case of Qatar and the investment in the World Cup, employing people so that they can look after themselves and their families from developing countries, that is a good thing. And that is a way towards addressing the poverty issue. Shifting the games from summer to winter. Gary Lineker raised that as an issue. I don't know why that was raised. I mean, it is obvious that had this been held over the summer, there would have been many, many casualties of heat stroke, so on and so forth. So that should have been decided earlier, but better late than never. So I don't know even why this was raised as an issue. In terms of the LGBT rights, there are cultural differences, of course. Now, Qatar is not the only country. Other countries, even non-Muslim countries, I can't think of any off the top of my head, have issues as well. But for some reason, Qatar had been isolated. Now, what is interesting in terms of the LGBT rights is the law does not go through the front door, into people's homes. What people do in the privacy of their own homes is really up to them, So the laws regarding LGBT rights, and I know this is a big discussion within diversity and inclusion, but as I say, diversity also includes diversity of opinions and ideas, and certainly this would be one of them. In terms of the laws that are there, in terms of the public display of gay people, lesbians, of the LGBT community, also applies to heterosexuals as well. So a man and a woman having really public display of kissing is something that would not be allowed in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE. So it applies to heterosexuals as well as homosexuals and gay and lesbians. So what is the issue here then? And in fact, if you think about it, in the Arab culture, when men greet each other, they would hug, embrace, and they may hold hands. They may kiss on the cheeks. So if gays did that, if homosexual men did that, no one would know that they were homosexual. It's a private affair, and something like that, which you do not see in the UK, that sort of display of camaraderie and greeting, you don't see in Western cultures. This is an Arab culture thing, but it's a bromance. It's a bromance thing rather than an LGBTQ thing. So no one would know whether people are LGBTQ or not. So what applies to that community also applies to the heterosexual community in terms of the restrictions. What happens in closed doors remains behind closed doors. So I don't know why this was raised as a huge issue. So when I raised this point with a person I was having a dialogue with, that the laws that are there regarding LGBTQ also applies to heterosexuals as well in terms of public display of affection, he said, "Oh God, well, it's so restrictive out there." Well, 2 points to understand. Firstly, is that what applies to the LGBTQ also applies to heterosexuals, certainly in the Middle East, but also applies in the West. That's the second point, because would people be allowed, regardless of which community they belong to, heterosexuals or not, would they be allowed to have sex in public, for example? What's going to happen if they did? They'll be arrested, right? And there have been cases where some men, some perverts, were arrested when they did self-pleasure, when they masturbated. Even some women as well had been arrested for doing exactly the same thing. A few months ago in America, I remember reading the reports. So there will be a boundary, won't there? So if you imagine a boundary as a circle, the diameter of the circle, or the length of the circumference of that boundary, might be shorter in Middle Eastern countries and Muslim countries, whereas in Western countries that are meant to be liberal countries, the boundary would be longer, or the diameter would be longer as well. But nevertheless, there is still a boundary, isn't there? And in relation to the LGBTQ rights, it's not just a Muslim thing and Western thing, and they're not mutually exclusive. There are people in the West, committed Christians, people belonging to other religious communities, that also disagree from a religious point of view about LGBTQ. But rather than being homophobic, LGBTQ phobic, discussion dialogue with mutual understanding, that's the way forward. So again, why was Qatar isolated for this particular issue? I don't know. And of course, some commentators did try to wear the rainbow armbands to make a point that really does not need to be made, because, as I say, the law does not meander its way beyond the front door or someone's house. What goes on in the house stays in the house. Okay, so it's interesting why this was raised. So the challenge to Gary Lineker is this: actions speak louder than words. So if you are really, really serious about LGBTQ rights, okay, here is the acid test. When did England win the World Cup? It was in 1966. That was a glorious, glorious day when they won the World Cup, as you can see in the video. Now, was homosexuality or gay lesbian relations, was that legal at that time in 1966 in the UK? The answer was no, it wasn't. It became legal since 1967, a year after the World Cup win. So given that LGBTQ relations were banned at that time in the UK, and the England team won the World Cup, then retrospectively you should be handing back the World Cup win, hand back the cup, retract the win. Are you able to do that? Because to be completely honest with your convictions and your belief, you would have to hand it back. But I don't think you will you? So how serious really are you in LGBTQ rights? Okay, saying is easier than acting. Let's look at America. They hosted a very successful Olympics in 1996. When were gay and lesbian relations made legal throughout the United States? It was in 2003 through the Lawrence versus Texas Act. So before then, homosexuality, lesbianism was not widely accepted in the US legally, which means that all the winnings that many teams of many nations made, those medals should be handed back to the USA, or just handed back, basically. That should be retracted because LGBTQ rights were not recognized at that time. Are they going to do that? So again, actions speak louder than words. So why, again, was Qatar being isolated for this particular issue? We don't know. Now, in terms of alcohol, I think I made the point before that this is an opportunity maybe for fans to enjoy the football for what it is, the game, rather than the alcohol, okay? And it was interesting that when some women, Western women who went to the Qatar games were interviewed, they said that they felt really safe. They didn't have to deal with hooligans and the men who are drunk and taking off the T-shirts. They felt really safe, and it was very, very family friendly as well. That was some of their feedback. And here's a picture of someone who thanked the Sheikh of Qatar. I know some people think that they were probably paid for it, but this has been the general feedback, that it was very, very family friendly. Now, because of the Muslim country, alcohol availability was very, very restricted, but nevertheless, there was some access for the fans. But I hope that they actually enjoyed the football for the game. Now, if they really want to enjoy Budweiser, for example, well, want to watch the England game, I will enjoy a Budweiser. And here it is, Budweiser peanuts. Okay, so non-alcoholic and vegetarian friendly as well. So I'll certainly be munching on this. Although it says here, good, great with beer. Obviously, I'm not going to have alcohol, but it'll be great with Pepsi Max. Okay, this is lime flavor, highly recommend it. If not into Pepsi, Diet Coke, vanilla flavor, really, really good. So it'll be peanuts and Pepsi. And incidentally, some of you may have seen Messi's Pepsi advert that was done in Qatar, I think. That was really, really good. A good bit of advertising for Pepsi. So you can have an alcohol-free enjoyment. So maybe this is one aspect that people who visited Qatar could actually learn from the Qatari Arab Islamic culture. And yes, there are things that Qatar could improve on, as raised by the critics, but it could work the other way around. So how about this? Why don't people take this away? See how future games could be improved elsewhere around the world, where women feel safe, where people do not get drunk. Anyway, food for thought. The other issue was women's rights. So Gary Lineker said there was a question around women's rights in Qatar. And in my first video, I did raise the issue of what I see as terrible human rights in terms of how women are treated. So I mentioned pornography, which is firmly embedded in our Western cultures, so much so that no one really gives two hoots now. Where most of the models in this business are women. Obviously, there are some men as well involved in this. Mostly women catering for a male market, mostly male market. Okay. Now, when we look at the sexualization of women, certainly I'm referring to some of the fans, so the women fans of some of the country football teams. So there were some women who were very, very scantily clad, and I think they were trying to really push the boundaries and tease the laws of Qatar. So this one is, I think, a well-known Croatian woman batting for the Croatian team, and with the type of clothing that she wore, obviously attracted a lot of attention. But, well, luckily the Qatari authorities did not arrest her. I mean, they probably cotton on to the fact that there will be people who will be pushing the boundaries to get the publicity and really tease. But I think they just stayed back, fine, that is the right thing to do. And also we had this England fan as well, again showing more of a flesh to attract probably male fans. And I wasn't aware of this, that this is actually a thing, the sexualization of women in these sporting games. So I researched further into this, and it looks like this is a commonly accepted thing. Why it should be accepted, I don't know. So the picture I'm about to show you, I'd advise Muslim men not to watch this, because it is quite racy. But I'm trying to make a point here. This is from the 2014 World Cup, where some women did actually go a bit further to expose more of their flesh. This was in Brazil, I think, in 2014. And why women would need to be sexualized for men to enjoy the game, I just don't know. So, and it's interesting that Gary Lineker did not even cotton on to that fact. And this particular picture here, she's a model who apparently came back from retirement to support the England team, and she posed so that Harry Kane and the boys would be motivated. And this links up quite nicely with pornography that I've mentioned, that's so widely available now. And let me ask the men who watch these pictures here, how would you feel if your wife was portrayed like this, so that millions of men could actually ogle at her body? Your wife, your daughter, your mother, your sister? How would you feel if they were portrayed like this? Let me ask the women who are watching this. If you call your husbands or your boyfriends to have a look at these photos, you probably won't, I understand that. Actually, don't ask him what he thinks of this, because you should not put him in a position where he's going to lie to you. Okay, he will definitely ogle at these women. So what would be your reaction if he did? You would expect that there'll be a boundary, that he would not look at other women like that. He'd be looking at you, not her. So there is a boundary, isn't there? There will be a boundary that you expect to be placed. So it's really interesting how the sexualization of women and being treated as sex objects, as pieces of meat, has been so firmly ingrained in the Western psyche now that it's no longer an issue. I remember way back in the 90s, I think it was the 80s and the 90s, when here in the UK, Mary Whitehouse campaigned against pornography and how women were being treated as objects for the leering eyes of men. And also Claire Short, Member of Parliament, did try to ban, like The Sun, for example, which used to have topless women on page 3. So that was a page 3 campaign to ban it. And they failed miserably. Okay. And when I spoke with someone from an organization called the Campaign Against Pornography, this is again going back to the mid-90s, I think, what they were telling me was that those organizations are really pushing pornography. They were making it much, much harder in terms of the eroticism, hardcore pornography. They're really, really trying to push it, make it really ingrained. And now, obviously, with the advent of the internet, very, very easy access. So as of 2022, pornography is rampant, it's ingrained, and that organization I mentioned that I had a conversation with, Campaign Against Pornography, no longer exists. It doesn't exist anymore. And of course, what I forgot to say was that in women's football games, so you've seen the World Cup for women, really, really interesting, fantastic, the England women's team. You don't see male fans going out in skimpy clothes, whether it's a mankini or something very erotic, in order to support the female England squad or any team. So it's interesting, isn't it, that women are sexualized. And what has been missed by Gary Lineker and like-minded critics, and this is the feedback that some of the women have given whilst in Qatar, is that the safety they've actually felt out there. And of course, laws in those countries in the Middle East, in some parts of Asia, are very, very strict when it comes to sexual harassment. Rape carries the death penalty out there, as well as murder and terrorism. Now, in terms of rape and sexual harassment, you hear quite a lot of these reports in the news here in the UK and in America and Europe. Women being sexually harassed by known people, boyfriends or colleagues or whatever. And you keep on hearing about the stories of sexual harassment, something that will not appear or will be very, very minimal within these Middle Eastern countries. So I'm surprised that has been ignored. And I've said it twice, I think, during this video, that women do feel safe when going out at night, including midnight. Now, when I've been to Saudi Arabia, to UAE with family, I have no problems whatsoever, when with the safety of women if they walk alone in midnight. So I'm just wondering what aspect of that culture could be imported back, or what lessons could be drawn to make women more safe. And the other thing that Gary Lineker completely missed out was that this Qatari World Cup is the first World Cup ever that has women referees in some of the men's games, right? So again, this is unprecedented. So again, when the question is raised by Gary Lineker that there are questions around women's rights in Qatar, what is the question? What are the questions? Okay, so I've dealt with the main aspects of what Gary Lineker said, so I hope that that has presented food for thought. Now, in terms of some of the Muslim critics, so some of them, for example, those who are involved in debates and discussions, so you can see a picture here of a discussion that took place criticizing the World Cup in Qatar for things that have happened that shouldn't have happened. So the availability of alcohol, although it was very, very restricted, understandable. So I think Qatar did try to do the best they could to balance, to try and accommodate all people. But what cannot be denied, and can't take this away from Qatar, is they had placed Islamic messages across Doha. The opening ceremony had a really beautiful recitation of the Quran, and the message that was there was just phenomenal. And to downgrade that, to criticize that, I think was wrong. And in terms of a daft statement that was made, which verges on conspiracy theory, was that you may remember the opening ceremony where you had Morgan Freeman and a guy called, a boy called Ghanem. And he doesn't have legs, so he was suffering from a disease. He's disabled. Again, diversity and inclusion, including the disabled. people, so he was included. And the scene where Morgan Freeman, as he was standing and looking down on Ghanem, Westerner looking down on the Arab, okay, on a Muslim. So it's about the colonial mentality looking down on an oppressed Muslim, and that what their solution was, he should have been sat on a chair, so they should have been level. I think that's an absolute load of tosh. It really is, because Ghanem was happy the way he is. That's how God created him. That's how Allah created him, with no legs. And there are, dwarves, for example. They're not going to go walk around on crutches or stilts, are they? To make them higher, they will walk as they normally would. In the case of Ghanem, he has got no legs, but he is quite happy to be as he is. So Morgan Freeman was not looking down on him as a colonial master. And a point to be noted was that black civilization has never colonized other countries. So more to portray Morgan Freeman as a Western colonialist is absolutely wrong. So it really daft here. And another daft thing they mentioned was when the fingers touched, yes, Morgan Freeman and Ghanem, when the fingers touched, it reminded them of the painting from Michelangelo, where God the Father is portrayed as a man, and his finger touched Adam. It was the creation of Adam. That's the painting. That somehow this was obviously sacrilegious, because Morgan Freeman is portrayed as God, and they also linked in with the movie that he starred in, which was Bruce Almighty, where he appeared as God as well. So this apparently was presenting polytheism, where you have God and Ghanem, who's meant to be Adam from that painting, Michelangelo. Again, absolute load of poppycock. Okay, that's the conspiracy theory which they are indulging themselves in. This is very harmless, guy, Morgan Freeman, Ghanem, touching the fingers as a sign of friendship. So when I first saw that, okay, Michelangelo painting did not come to mind. What came to mind was this, okay. E.T., the extraterrestrial. You remember E.T. Touching Elliot's finger, and then boom. Okay, that's what it reminded me of. So you're reading into things that are not there, and I'm just really tired of some of the Muslim conspiracy theorists that have no basis whatsoever. So, for example, when I was engaging with someone from America, I'm a great fan of Star Trek, but what she said was that the Borg cube, okay, so it looks very similar to the Kaaba. So Gene Roddenberry apparently tried to portray the Borg cube as being against Muslims because it looked like the Kaaba. Rubbish. No, it didn't. It's just a damn Borg cube, okay? And the Federation destroyed them, didn't they, in one of the episodes? So I take great exception to that, but there are many dawah centers. A dawah means invitation, where speakers have gone and answering questions about Islam. And again, in terms of freedom of expression, there have been really robust discussions in those meetings that I've seen on video in Qatar, open discussions, and it should happen. Okay. So in terms of my third point, which is shifting perspectives, so I hope that non-Muslims at least, who've been really highly critical of Qatar, may shift in thinking. And as to why Qatar was isolated, I still don't have an answer to this. But also, it's a chance for us as Muslims to shift our thinking as well, because although we criticized why non-Muslims or Western communities were politicizing a game in a Muslim country, we unfortunately have also been politicizing the game as well. So I remember some of the fans in the crowd, they waved the Palestinian flag, so trying to make a point against Israel, which was completely unnecessary. And I think in terms of a shift in our thinking, understanding, the Arab countries need to reach out to Israel, and Muslims, we need to reach out to our Jewish community folk. Now, in 2018, when I was in Dubai, I recorded a message and I said that Muslim countries must recognize the state of Israel. Okay, those are our Jewish brothers there, and in Abrahamic brotherhood, because that's what connects us. And lo and behold, 2 years later, the UAE recognized the state of Israel in 2020 through the Abraham Accords. I don't know, again, if they saw my video or not. But that is the key there. And it's really trying to understand the challenges that the Israeli community may go through. What is Zionism? We get offended when people mis-stereotype our religion. They stereotype or misunderstand Sharia law. Well, maybe we are also misunderstanding what's happening in Israel and the Jewish community there. It's a chance for us to understand. And Qatar definitely, should recognize the state of Israel, I think. So we have, I think it was the UAE, Bahrain, they recognize. Saudi Arabia, I really hope, inshallah, God willing, that they can reach out. The land of the Prophet, reaching out to the land of the prophets. That would be a good thing in true Abrahamic brotherhood. Okay, that is the solution. Religion is the solution to the problems there, not secularism, which has underpinned all of that nonsense, the political turmoil in Israel and the Israel-Palestine issue. But that's a debate for another time. But it's a chance for us as Muslims to shift our perspective, and India as well. So much has been said about the Hindutva, which is the ideology of Hinduism, sort of implemented politically, socially. I would say it's an equivalent of Sharia. So as Muslims, want and abide by Sharia law in Muslim countries, and what we've seen in India, certainly in the last 20 years, has been rampant secularization. And if I mention the word India, what comes to mind? Is it Bollywood? If it is, well, Bollywood today, I'm not talking about yesterday, today represents absolute trash of Indian. It's ruined Indian culture, it really has, Bollywood. So if some of our Hindu brothers, they want to reassert themselves and follow Vedic values, so from the Vedas, religious values to be implemented in society, we as Muslims, we are the first people who should understand this, okay, and not behave like ignorant non-Muslims do about Islam and Sharia. Yes, there have been problems, certainly in the UK, I think in Nottingham was it, very recently, a few weeks ago, skirmishes between Hindus and Muslims. I mean, extremism is a no-go area, both from a Muslim and a Hindu point of view. The Quran condemns terrorism and extremism, and the Vedas certainly does not encourage extremism either. Certainly there's a chance, again, for a paradigm shift to engage positively with the Hindu community that advocates Hindutva, which is the Hindu version of Sharia. Okay, so I brought these in as well because my main challenge was to non-Muslims, to Gary Lineker, who stereotyped Arab culture, Islamic culture, but I think it's a chance for us as Muslims as well to remove any misunderstanding and ignorance we may have about the Jewish Israeli culture or the Hindutva culture. And I hope that these discussions, will continue after the end of the World Cup, right, and in a positive manner. So I did say there's one thing I'm going to leave behind in my concluding remarks. I've said so many things, but as a summary, there's one thing I'm going to leave behind. But before I do that, I'd like you to pause this for 10 seconds and think of a key message you're going to take away from this little video, this short video. One key message you're going to take away. Pause it now for 10 seconds and then come back to me. Right, okay, so I'm assuming you've paused and you've taken away a key message from this, a learning point. That will be my gift to you. But my key message after all of that is this: that England is going to thrash France in the quarterfinals, okay? Mark my words. If they don't, if you're watching this video after that tournament and if England lost, hey, listen, the lion will roar again. Thanks for listening.